In terms of what we can do to help the chances of this civilization surviving, education has got to be one of the key elements in it. I think education has got worse during the last 40, 50 years. I haven't been involved in it except at the level of teaching younger doctors and things like that. So my experience of certainly school teaching is from my young days when it was exceptionally good. And I'm going, therefore, mainly on what I hear reported. But I feel that it's like everything, it's become over administrated, over evaluated at all levels, constant checking and ticking and so on. And what this tends to encourage is that the idea of an education is putting information into children. It couldn't be further from that. It's about not putting in things at all, certainly not putting in information. I mean, that may happen. I mean, that may be a byproduct of education, and it's an important one. Somebody who left school with no information would obviously be in a rather poor way. I understand that. But it can't remotely constitute in itself an education. An education is about drawing something out, not putting something in. It's about drawing out something that is already latent, innate in the person that is being educated. And that is done by, as always, a mixture between, or should I say, steering a very important path between two opposite problems. One is the problem of too much structure, too much emphasis on the, quote, right answer, and too much regulation and not enough independence for the child, but equally avoiding the opposite one in which they just please themselves, anything goes, let it all hang out. Neither of these is a sensible or indeed a decent or compassionate way to treat a living being. One is just abandoning them, and the other is destroying them by overregulation. So what I believe should happen is that there should be, first of all, I think that teachers should be more independent from government edict. And when when I was growing up, our own school system in England was contrasted, of course, favourably by us, with the system in France, where on the morning of the 3rd of March, 1962, every child in France would be on the same page of the same book. And this was said to be a reflection of the dirigiste character of French culture, whereas there was much more freedom to what we did. But so I think having that freedom is good, and trusting teachers is good. And I would say, get the best teachers you can. There's no other criterion than how good they seem to be when you interview them and so on. That is why you employ them. Give them a good deal of leeway and keep an eye on what their pupils are turning out like. And if there's a problem, you should be allowed to sack them without too much trouble. At the moment, once you get to be whatever it is, it's almost impossible to sack you however bad you are. And I understand that's protective for the teacher, but it was also stultifying for everybody if you saddle with somebody who's doing a very bad job and they can't be got rid of. So, I mean, really, that's only a passing note. But what I'm trying to say is, it's probably the necessary safeguard if you're going to give them a great deal of independence. So I would gather a group of teachers who are different from one another, phenomenal, excited by what they were teaching, and allow them to go ahead. And yes, that you would test them and so on, and children, and see how they're getting on. And unless there's any particular problem, then that's a really well-running school. But what I understand is that it's all about, no, they must know this particular thing, and there are 12 things you must say about Jane Austen, or if Jane Austen's even allowed in the curriculum anymore nowadays. It's all very sad. People are being dragged away from the history of their own culture, without which they can't really understand what they're looking at in the culture around them. There's Neil Postman, who I'm very late in the day, I'm reading his book, Technopoly, about what's happened to our culture. And really, he's saying things that I've been saying for a very long time, but he did say them before me. That unless we have a grounding in our own culture and its history, and unless we understand the works of literature like Shakespeare and poetry and drama, unless we understand, and music becomes part of our education, acting is part of our education, it's not an education. And another part of it should be free thinking. So at my school, I was taught, okay, come on, tell us something you really are very important, you think is very important, and you're passionate about it. So I would talk about it for 5 minutes. And then they say, yep, that's fine. Now, imagine you're somebody who has exactly the opposite belief. Now argue their point of view for 5 minutes, and we'll score you on how good you are at that. Now, if more of children couldn't leave school without doing that, there'd be less of the simplistic, this view is right, that view is wrong, rather than saying that most views can be taken to extremes in which they become wrong, but there is common ground between many sensible, wise thinkers. So we need to get away from, you see, the left hemisphere is black and white in its thinking. It's either this or it's that. It has no time for subtlety, for nuance, for a bit of this and a bit of that, for the coming together of opposites. It thinks, no, it's this. And if so much of this was good, then more and more and more of it would be better. So a right hemisphered educational system would produce people who were, first of all, yes, capable of doing the so-called STEM subjects. That is important, but they're not in themselves an education. They do need the humanities, because guess what? They're going to be human beings, we hope, and live their lives among human beings, and the key's in the word. So do a bit of that as well, rather a lot of that. Yes, do creative work. Yes, learn to think flexibly, and learn how to mediate between people and listen to them. So, and it wouldn't take very long. It needn't be a big part of education, but it could be a week, in perhaps one of the later years at school, in which you all spent time learning how to mediate between two groups of people with completely opposing ideas. If people were trained in that, gosh, that would create a happier society. And the other one that I think of, but isn't familiar to most people unless they've been through it themselves, is really a form of couples therapy. And it's applicable across the board, not just the couples. So in couples therapy, there are two people who want to either part on better terms or get their life together back on track. And to do that, they need to understand what the other person wants and sees and hopes for. So you have the two people, and you ask one of them to talk about what they conceive as being the main problem that they're facing. And then they'll say something, and the other person will say, oh, but that's always when you... And they say, no, hang on, you'll have your chance in a minute, but we want to hear more from this person. And so that person has their say. And then the first thing that happens is you turn to the other person and say, what did you just hear said? And it's incredibly revealing, because they say what they thought they heard said. And the other person says, that's fantastic, because I never meant that at all. I meant this. And then the other person goes, Oh, well, that's useful to know. So much misunderstanding happens because people get into shouting matches in which they never hear anything that doesn't confirm what it is that's already going around in their head. So
Yeah.
that's what I'd say on that one.
Yeah, it seems like if education was truly the way it was, the word was designed, educo, I believe, Greek or Latin origins, to evoke from within, not stuff things down, not just what to think, but
it's Latin, meaning to draw something out or lead something forth. Yeah.